All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really powerful psychological idea. But we're not going to do it with some dry textbook definition. Nope. We're going to explore it through the incredible and ultimately tragic story of one man's courage. So let's kick things off with a story most of us probably heard as kids. You know the one, the ultimate underdog tale. You've got a young shepherd, this massive warrior, and one single stone that completely changes everything. It's that classic story of courage against, well, impossible odds. But what does this ancient battle have to do with a modern Russian activist? Well, that's the big question, right? It's because this classic tale of facing down a giant, it gives us the perfect way to understand a very real, very modern phenomenon. And more importantly, the story of a man who had to face a giant of his own. And that phenomenon is called the tall poppy syndrome. Ever heard of it? It's this idea that as a society, we have this weird tendency to, well, cut down the tallest poppy in the field. Basically, we resent, attack, or criticize people who stand out, who achieve a little too much. It's this pressure to fit in. You see it everywhere, in the office, among friends, but sometimes the stakes are way, way higher than that. Sometimes it's literally life and death. Now, our guide for this whole explainer is the leading authority on this stuff, Dr. Doug Garland. He's a retired surgeon who has dedicated himself to studying this. I mean, he literally wrote the book on it. It's called The Tall Poppy Syndrome, The Joy of Cutting Others Down. He also founded the website tallpoppysyndrome.org, which is an amazing resource if you want to dig deeper. Okay, so with that background, let's turn to our modern-day tall poppy, a man named Ildar Dadin, who made the choice to stand up to a giant. Ildar Dadin's story really kicks off back in 2011. He was motivated by these accusations of major voter fraud in Russia. And look, he wasn't some big-shot politician. He was just a regular citizen who believed he should be involved. But his protests, which were often just him, by himself, made him stand out. He became that tall poppy. And because of that, he became a target. The very first person convicted under this new, very restrictive 2014 law. In fact, the law even became known as the Dadin Law because of him. And this really gets to the heart of who he was at the time. He said, "My actions were exclusively peaceful and nonviolent." At his trial, he insisted, "Look, I'm just exercising my constitutional rights." He was all in on nonviolence, even when it meant he was going to prison for it. So, what happens when you're a tall poppy in a system that really doesn't like people who stand out? What's the price you pay? Well, for Ildar Dadin, that price was absolutely immense. He was sent to this prison colony, and what he went through was just horrific. Systematic torture. It was a brutal, calculated attempt to cut him down. But somehow, he managed to smuggle a letter out to his wife, describing everything. And when that letter got out, it caused a huge public outcry, bringing his case onto the world stage. So just look at the incredible arc of his life here. It starts in 2011. He's imprisoned in 2015. But then, after all that public pressure, Russia's Supreme Court actually overturned his conviction in 2017. He was released. He even got compensation. For a second there, it really looked like the tall poppy had survived being cut down. But his story was a long way from being over. And then came 2022, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This was obviously a massive turning point for the entire world, but for Ildar Dadin, it fundamentally changed everything about what he believed in. Yeah, the very same man who once insisted his actions were exclusively peaceful and nonviolent came to a completely different conclusion. Facing a total war, he decided that nonviolent resistance was, in his own words, pointless. He said it had zero practical meaning. I mean, what an absolute 180 in his entire worldview. So what did he do? He made a choice that stunned a lot of people. In 2023, he joined up with the Siberian Battalion, a unit of Russian nationals fighting on the side of Ukraine. And here's the kicker, the most profound irony. His military call sign was Gandhi. He said he was still inspired by the idea of nonviolent resistance, but he felt that he'd reached the last resort, and the only way to resist was now with force. And tragically, on October 5th, 2024, Ildar Dadin was killed in action by Russian artillery fire in Ukraine. The tall poppy, the man who became famous for his peaceful protests, ended up giving his life on the battlefield, fighting the very same government that had locked him up and tortured him. So, where does this leave us? What are we supposed to make of this incredibly tragic story? How does it all circle back to the tall poppy syndrome? And maybe even the nature of courage itself?
To help us make sense of it, let's go back to our expert, Dr. Garland. He's actually got a new book coming out called Sing to Virtue, Transforming the Tall Poppy Syndrome by Understanding the 7 Deadly Sins. In it, he connects this whole phenomenon to these timeless ideas of virtue and vice.
Dr. Garland talks about the 4 cardinal virtues from classical philosophy. You've got prudence, which is practical wisdom, justice, fairness, temperance, self-control, and then fortitude. And fortitude is courage in the face of fear. Dadin's story, it's just such a powerful and really complex example of that virtue, of fortitude. The courage to face unimaginable fear for what he believed in.
You know, Dr. Garland points to this quote from Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. And it just feels so right for this story, doesn't it? It gets at that sense of duty, that deep conviction you have when you're up against these massive forces. It really seems to capture the heart of Dadin's final, tragic choice. Which brings us to our last thought, and it's a really tough question that comes straight from the source material. I wonder what Martin Luther King would think. I mean, Dadin's journey from a committed, peaceful activist to a soldier on the front lines, it's a lot to wrap your head around. It leaves us with this incredibly difficult question to think about. What happens when peaceful resistance runs up against total war? And honestly, there's just no easy answer to that one.